is our new fellowship director. And you'll be hearing more about Derek and his background in our upcoming newsletter, which is going out next week. But Derek, would you please wave to everyone just so that everyone can see who you are and say hello?
Sure.
So that your picture will pop up and they'll know who you are.
Hi, everybody. I'm Derek. Thank you for having me here today. Hello to the Hertz community and friends. I look forward to working with everybody here moving forward.
Great, thank you. And it's been all of 2 weeks, maybe?
Just under 2 weeks.
Okay. So this is the first Innovation Hour of 2021, but we were having 2 this month. In fact, the second one will be on Saturday, January 30th, 9 a.m. Pacific time, which is noon Eastern. It will feature Hertz fellow Caitlin Schutz, who will speak on how dark forces shape our universe. And in February, our Hertz fellow Bill Weil will be speaking on driving rapid decarbonization. And that will be on Wednesday, February 17th at noon Pacific, 3 o'clock Eastern. You can find more information about both events on our events page on our website. And we look forward to seeing you there. So with that, I have the pleasure of introducing our panel for our career transition discussion today. And I want to make note that this discussion is about transitions rather than general career advice. For example, from transitioning from academia to industry or between different fields or different industries, or segueing into retirement. So a couple of notes, please type your questions into the chat box. We'll get to those after the panelists have had time to share their stories and answer some questions from our moderator. But I do want to let you know the panel is very excited to answer your questions, so we'll leave ample time for that today. And we're also recording this session so that you or anyone who can't attend today can review that later, and we'll send that link out in another week or so once the video is ready. So at this point, I would like to introduce our panel, and I'm going to read some short bios. Our first panelist is Lily Kim. Lily is partner and chief scientist at OS Fund. She has been an expert in early stage life sciences commercialization for over 15 years. Prior to OS Fund, Lily was at Harvard's Wyss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering, helping research groups there commercialize their work. Lily established a community forum for microfluidics commercialization in New England and helped the Los Angeles-based neurotechnology company Kernel get its start. Throughout her career, she has advised Fortune 500 biotech and pharmaceutical companies, as well as multiple funders and investors. Lily received both her SB in electrical engineering and PhD in biomedical engineering from MIT and Harvard. Greg Taylor is our second panelist, and Greg is a semi-retired consultant with expertise in analog mixed signal circuit designs and systems on chip. A former Intel fellow, Taylor was responsible for the development of analog mixed signal circuits in a variety of roles throughout his 24-year tenure at Intel Corporation. His work includes several senior design engineering positions, working on 10 generations of microprocessors and leading several research and design labs. Taylor received his doctorate in computer and systems engineering from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And our moderator today is Dale Stewart. Dale has achieved world-class recognition in numerous endeavors. She received her doctorate of science in aerospace engineering from MIT, and then joined TRW as one of its first female aerospace engineers, where she designed satellites and scientific spacecraft for NASA. And she left a promising career at TRW to become a 7-time world champion in freestyle skydiving. Today, Dale is a clinical psychologist with a thriving private practice supporting the growth of gifted, talented individuals. She's a frequent keynote speaker on the unique social and emotional needs of the gifted. Dale's diverse range of interests and careers is the story of fulfilling dreams and living life with intensity and passion. So at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Dale, and we look forward to the discussion. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Carla. And this is a particularly fun topic for me because I've almost made a career out of career transitions. as Carla hinted at, I've had several major and a few minor careers in my time. And I'm going to tell the story of what ties them all together. There is, believe it or not, some glue to this story. But I'm going to highlight, when I tell my story, I'm going to highlight the forces, the factors that drove me to making the transitions and the difficulties and the challenges that I faced in the process, maybe a little bit before making the transition or after, because I believe many of those factors are things we have in common when we have to go through some sort of transition, whether it's planned or not planned, whether it's our choice or whether it's imposed upon us. So that's what I'm going to sort of be emphasizing rather than the actual specifics. And then in the questions that come up later, we can see where the discussion goes, but I'll be glad to try to address both general ideas about making transitions as well as possibly some guidance about how to deal with the difficulties and the challenges that you may face. So first, I'm going to give you a bird's eye view of the things that I've done that brought me to where I am today. And then I'll take you through my journey in more detail with the highlights on some of those decisions that I had to make each time I changed course and went through one of those transitions. And my life so far, as Carla mentioned, has consisted of three major parts. And the first was the career as an aerospace engineer. The second was the career as a competition skydiver in the event called freestyle skydiving, which is basically a combination of dance and gymnastics type moves that we perform during those 45 seconds of free fall. And then the third major part of my life, or of my third major career, was in the field of clinical psychology. And that's where I am now. And I have a private practice, as Carla mentioned, and I specialize in working with gifted individuals, which in many ways does tie together all my prior careers, as maybe you'll see. Okay, so we've got aerospace engineering, skydiving, and psychology. And on the surface, these appear to be completely unrelated to one another, but they actually all arose from interests that I had from the very beginning, even as a child. And these interests are kind of like threads that wove in and out over the course of my life. And the different ones came to the forefront at different times when opportunities came up, maybe that let me pursue them more fully and even make a career out of them. So here's how it all came about, and how through, I guess, a combination of stubbornness, maybe daring, definitely some irrational blind faith, and a heavy dose of good luck. This is how I've arrived at where I am today, with a checkered past that has at least given me a good story to tell. So one of the major interests I had going back way to the beginning, I had an interest as a child in dolphins. And I just love these fascinating, playful animals. But in the 1970s, all we knew was that they had very big brains and they made complex sounds. This to me meant there was a possibility that they were extremely intelligent and actually used some sort of language to communicate with one another. And I was really interested in this possibility. So when I was ready to go to college, I looked for programs that fit my interests, but it turned out there weren't any schools that offered a major in dolphin intelligence or dolphin languages. Imagine that. Definitely something missing in the world. So the next best thing seemed to be to major in human psychology. After all, if I could learn about how the human mind worked and how we humans use language to express ourselves, even if poorly, I figured there had to be some parallels with dolphin minds. So off I went to Reed College. And for those of you who don't know, that's a really tiny liberal arts college in Portland, Oregon. And I launched my studies in the field of psychology. Now, most psychology programs in those days, again, this is the 1970s, most of those programs started with Freud. So I studied his theories, but I somehow had a hard time believing that dolphins suffered from Oedipus complexes and oral fixations. All those were the core tenets of Freudian theory. And I didn't quite believe that the motivation for dolphins' behavior really could be found in their subconscious. Then I ran into the same roadblock in my lab course on Skinner's theories about animal behavior. And we had fun. We learned to train rats to press a bar in return for bits of food. But Skinner's model of the mind only taught me that we do what feels good and we do it again and again and again. So this still didn't get me beyond square one with understanding dolphins. But I finished out my freshman year at Reed College, and then I came back to California to sort out my goals and dreams. I realized I couldn't pursue dolphin studies as my primary career goal anymore, but I couldn't completely give up my interest in dolphins. But I had nothing else on hand to replace it with. I had no other idea for what I wanted to do for a career. So that was a really tough time for me, having that void and not having a clear goal for what I wanted to do for a career. But I still had plenty of other interests that I felt passionate about, and flying airplanes, and in fact, flying gliders in particular, was one of them. So since I've been making model airplanes and taking trips to the local airport just to watch the planes take off and land, but I'd never actually had the chance to fly one myself, I decided now during this year off was the time to try to put that into action. So during that summer after my first year at Reed, some very fortunate things happened. First of all, my parents decided to go out of town for a couple of weeks, and they left me with their master charge card. Next, by chance, I met someone who was a glider pilot and discovered there was an active glider port close to home. So my new friend then took me on my first real glider ride, and I was absolutely thrilled. Then within the next few days, while my parents were still gone, mind you, I was 18, so I didn't need their permission for this. I took flying lessons, and then I soloed, and soon I was signed off to fly by myself. Now, the whole tab for this adventure went onto my parents' charge card. So needless to say, I had a bit of explaining to do when they returned home. Unfortunately, they were very understanding, and they let me off with a promise of paying it all back again someday, which I did. I really did. So I decided not to go back to Reed College. I got a job at the glider port. I jokingly call it a ground operations manager, which really means I was just running the line and attaching the rope to the nose of the gliders and helping them launch. Nothing glamorous, but it was letting me buy the time to think about and sort out what I wanted to do next. I got my private and commercial licenses in gliders, and so I spent the rest of the year immersed in the life of a pilot and basically just a flying junkie. Now, I was not interested in making flying into a career, so I still had the nagging problem of figuring out what to do for a real career. And in addition to the thrill of being a pilot, I was fascinated with the physics of flying and with the design of airplanes and sailplanes. So I have to give my mother credit then for helping me take the next step, since she suggested that I think about becoming an engineer so that I can make a career out of designing airplanes and turn this interest into my studies and then into a career. But at the time, I had no idea what being an engineer was really all about, and I was a bit skeptical. But just based on the fun I had and the idea of designing airplanes, it made it sound like an appealing path to pursue. So the more I looked into it, the more interesting it actually appeared. My father insisted that I at least apply to MIT. And so I did. And MIT in turn did turn out to be a really great fit for me. And I thrived both intellectually and socially in that environment. And so I was really excited about my studies. And I finally felt like I was on a track moving towards a career that I knew I would enjoy. On the lighter side of my time at MIT, I continued flying sailplanes, since MIT actually had a soaring club. In fact, they had a just about anything you can imagine club at MIT. And then at one point, a bunch of my friends from the Space Systems Lab, which I was a part of, they all got together and they wanted to make a first skydive. So now, so far, all of my aerial adventures, and admittedly, maybe some misadventures, had been from the inside of an airplane. But I was curious to see what kind of adventures and maybe mischief I could get into on the outside of an airplane. So I went along with my friends and gave skydiving a try. I made my first jump, and as brief as it was, I was hooked. I loved the sense of freedom. I loved that it was more athletic than just sitting still inside the cockpit of a plane. And so during that last year at MIT, I went skydiving as much as I could. I graduated from MIT in 1987 and moved down to LA, where I am now, and took a job as an aerospace engineer here at TRW. But I continued my skydiving on weekends as much as I could. Within my first few years at TRW, my career took off pretty quickly, and I really was enjoying the technical work and the challenges within my work at TRW. And I was really proud to be part of the teams that were designing spacecraft to perform important missions for both NASA and other agencies. So it was easy for me to feel good about the work I was doing because it was noble work, and I had no problem feeling like I was living up to all the expectations that others had had of me. And that was important for me in finding a sense of meaning and value in the work that I was doing. And you'll see how that folds back in and causes some of the struggles that I faced later on. But meanwhile, I was still skydiving nearly every weekend. And as soon as I learned about the event called freestyle skydiving, which I told you was more acrobatic, I knew that that was the event for me, since it was very similar to gymnastics, which I had done in high school, and it involved the acrobatic moves, which really suited me perfectly. I started entering freestyle competitions. I started winning them, and I wanted to see how far I could go in the sport, since I love the chance to be creative, to be in the air, as well as to be doing something athletic. And it played to many of my strengths. And so I truly felt like I was born to do the freestyle skydiving. Now the sport kept growing each year and becoming more popular. And each year I kept winning the competitions. And as a result, I started receiving sponsorship. I got an agent. I started receiving requests to coach other teams and requests to give seminars at skydiving centers around the world. And by the third year for me in competition, these opportunities had grown to the point where I could viably pursue this as a career full time. But there was only one problem. I still had a full-time job at TRW. So now I was facing the problem of having too many possible career choices at one time. But with my freestyle skydiving, I felt like I had caught just a once in a lifetime wave, and I didn't want to pass it up. To continue on this path and take it as far as I could, however, it meant I would have to leave my aerospace job at TRW. And that was a decision that I agonized over for many, many reasons. As I mentioned, my aerospace work had clear meaning. It was noble work. And there was no doubt that what I was doing was respected and valued by others. And that was important to me. My skydiving, on the other hand, did not feel quite so noble. In fact, the opposite was true. It felt self-indulgent and frivolous to me. And I couldn't see how my skydiving really had any value to society. And that was tough for me. On top of that, I felt the weight of all of those expectations that I believe were implied by the fellowships that I had received, not the least of which, of course, was the Hertz Fellowship. And that also played a large role in the difficulty that I had with that decision. So I really, really struggled with that one. But because pursuing an athletic career was really a once in a lifetime opportunity, I made the decision, since I still hadn't reached my peak in the sport, I couldn't walk away from something that really did feel like such a perfect match for me. And the skydiving competition, something athletic like that, wasn't a career I could put on hold and come back to later. So I left my aerospace job and went after the skydiving full time. And once I was more available within the sport, even more opportunities, even many I hadn't anticipated, appeared. And it really was an amazing adventure. And I have no regrets about the choice that I made looking back. But one of the things I hadn't anticipated was the extent of the media interest and the ways that others actually reacted when they saw my performances. And people were saying that they were awed and amazed and even inspired when they saw my skydiving. And at first this was kind of puzzling for me, but the words that people kept repeating were things like, I never knew this was possible, or I never would have believed anyone could do that, because there really was at that time no one else doing what I was doing in the sport as the world champion. And when I was on the CNN a CNN program, Jim Huber, who was the host, really said it best when he said, there are those who keep that dream of flying alive and do something wonderfully creative about it. So when I stepped back and I could see the way that my performances inspired other people and the way my story was being presented by the media as an inspiration to others, an inspiration to keep their hopes alive and to keep reaching for their own dreams, I was able to realize that what I was doing did have meaning after all. And that settled in on me over time, but it became a huge relief. And if I was delusional about it, I don't care. It finally made me feel good about doing this and pursuing the skydiving. So I retired from competition after 7 years. When I finally felt like I had taken the sport as far as I could as a competitor. But believe me, retiring after a ride like that was not at all easy. Not the least of which was the issue that now I was back to a familiar question, but with a slight variation, what to do with the rest of my life. I knew at that point that I could not go back to aerospace, but remaining gainfully self-unemployed, as I called it, was not an option. I still needed to work. So I looked back into the field of psychology. And actually, I started seeing a psychologist myself to see if someone else could help me sort out my choices for what to do next, what path to follow and what career might feel fulfilling for me. Unexpectedly, in that process, I learned that the field of psychology had come a long, long ways from where it was when I had studied it first at Reed College. We're now like 30 years later, I hate to say. But the truth was the modern theories, since they were based on actual research, they made a lot more sense to me than what I'd first learned based on the theories of Freud or Skinner. And in fact, modern theories were giving me some real meaningful insights into my own feelings and behavior. So I became fascinated with these modern theories and wanted to learn more about them. And that eventually was what made it become a viable path for a new career for me. So I went back to school for the PhD in clinical psychology, and that was not an easy choice, but that was what I decided I really wanted to do, set my sights on that. I got through the program in good time, got licensed, and set up my own independent private practice, which is what I'm doing now. So it was a natural for me to choose a specialty working with other gifted individuals, since that built on a lot of my strengths and allowed me to draw from my own experiences in the various other fields that I'd had contact with or actually worked in, and then to offer my experience and firsthand knowledge of those environments in my work with this population, with other gifted individuals. So where I am now, that work now feels as gratifying and as rewarding for me as anything else I've done. And I don't have to struggle with the question is it of value? Does it have meaning? Am I doing something of service for others and for society? Because I think I've checked all those boxes, even as circuitous a path as it really has been. So there's the story of my checkered past and how I navigated my various career transitions. All right, I guess now, Carla, we turn it over to another one of our co-panelists.
Lily, would you like to share your story, please?
Sure, I'll just hit kind of the highlights and then people can ask questions or even follow up later if they like. So I started off majoring in electrical engineering in undergrad and have had a number of transitions. I'm now 45 and some of them bigger, some of them smaller. I think at each step, most of the way, I kept kind of exploring because there was something a little bit missing at each step for me, and I kept wanting to explore other things. So that's part of the motivation that continues. So I started in electrical engineering, did some internships in college at Hewlett Packard Research Labs, felt like there was still something I wanted to explore more, something different. So for graduate school, I switched into biomedical engineering. Within graduate school, I actually switched my research group from computational neuroscience, modeling how the brain and nervous system control arm movements, to a different field when I was in my 4th year, which was extremely difficult. I would say kind of traumatic at the time. And you know, I talked to a lot of people for advice. I wasn't sure if it was the right thing. One of the people actually who really encouraged me the most was Tom Weaver, he from the Hertz Foundation, who I talked to, and I said, I just don't know if it's too late for me to change. I had come to a point in my work where I had kind of been ignoring it. I'd kind of been, I think part of me knew I needed to change, but part of me had kind of suppressed that because I was in my 4th year and it seemed like too crazy an idea to change then. And I was kind of in denial until I came to a point where I realized I just couldn't continue in that path anymore. And I said to Tom Weaver, I don't know, I think it might be too late for me to change. And he said, well, is it ever too late? And so I thought I was just done. And I can't remember how old I was. I was probably like 26 or something like that then. And he made me kind of question, oh, well, maybe it's not too late. Maybe I could change. So I switched my field to an area that was working on lab on a chip systems, building instruments for biologists to be able to do better experiments growing stem cells on chips. Finished my PhD. By that point, I'd been in grad school for 9 years. It was a really long time that I felt like I didn't quite know which direction to go. I didn't quite feel that academic research was the right thing for me, but I didn't quite know what was. I just decided to switch fields to business strategy to try something different. I had done one business course in grad school. I liked it. So I got a job at a life sciences strategy consulting firm called Decision Resources Group. And that was one of the avenues at that time where they would accept PhDs from science and engineering who didn't have extensive training in business, and you basically learn it on the job. So I was very fortunate to get with to be in a very wonderful working environment with great colleagues and bosses who I learned a lot from. Then after about I don't know, a couple years, I had kind of learned a lot of some of the different types of projects they had done, but I missed some of the work. I still missed working with some of that cutting edge technology like I had in graduate school. On the side, I started blogging about commercialization of the types of technologies I'd done for my PhD, and also started organizing events for people in the community around that. And through that, I started getting incoming requests. Did I do independent consulting in this area? I had never considered it, but I eventually decided to quit my job and do independent consulting on that. Did that for a while. One of my clients was the Wyss Institute at Harvard, and that actually grew into a full-time role. So I was there for about 3 years, and all this work was essentially in the business realm. I was working in business development at Harvard, working with a number of different research groups, trying to help them position their technologies to be closer to commercialization. Then about, let's see, in 2014, I moved to California and made another transition again. I didn't exactly know what and it was sort of a personal reason to move. So I left my job at Harvard, did not necessarily have something definite in mind, but explored again, happened to go to a synthetic biology conference. I met an individual, an entrepreneur, Brian Johnson, who had just sold his company to PayPal and was interested in starting an investment fund investing in science-based companies. And I've been working with him ever since. And so that's the nutshell.
Thank you, Lily. Greg, would you like to share your story? And I know that
Sure.
you've done a lot in one place, but you're making a transition right now. So
Well, and
share that.
if I go way back, I got into this because I'm interested in the family business. My father was an engineer working on UNIVAC 1, back around 1950. And I knew I wanted to be an engineer before I knew what engineering was. I also had some interest in anthropology, archaeology type things, but in the late 70s, as I was exiting high school, in the one case, there's like 300 applicants per job. In the other case, there's like 300 jobs per applicant. It just seemed a lot more practical to go after engineering. So I got a degree in computer and systems engineering, it's glorified electrical engineering, but it's more on the side of putting complex systems together. The basic building block is a complex system. You make more complex systems, as opposed to electrical engineering, where you're playing around with electrons and copper wire and all this. But I had a lot of fun doing it. But then I went to work for a startup company, and one of the things I learned very quickly at a startup company is you can't be a specialist. You got to do a bit of everything, because there just aren't that many people around to do all these other things. And so I became a bit more of a generalist. I learned a lot more about transistors and wires and putting things together. And that went well, but it was a startup company. It limped along for many years. And after I'd been there about 6 years, someone pinged me and said, well, we have this other job. And the company really wasn't looking that healthy. Intel sounded interesting, so I moved to Intel. Within, 9 months, the company I left was bankrupt, so maybe it wasn't a terrible choice. But at Intel, I continued further in that direction. Now, analog mixed signal circuits, which is very much down in the dirt of electrons and holes and dealing with quantum phenomena, is where I've ended up spending most of my career. I was part of Intel's technology development organization, so I was a circuit designer working with the transistor developers in that same group, and went through many generations of process there. And so I've drifted throughout my career in this other direction. Also, if you'd asked me when I was in high school, I would have told you engineering was about physics and numbers and problem solving and going off by yourself and doing wonderful things. And of course, I learned very quickly in engineering, you want to do anything meaningful, you have to work with other people. It's a team sport, much as we might like to think otherwise. Physics and math matter, but working effectively with others matters a lot more. And so I ended up not just being a pure engineer, which I told people for years was my goal, but I have been in and out of management. I've managed teams as large as 200 plus, and then gone back to individual contributor, and then moved back into management, and then back into individual contributor. I think I went through management 3 times. But eventually, after I'd been at Intel probably about 22 years, I said, I'm not really sure I want to be doing this, but it was really very consuming, and I was debating, retirement. At that point, I wasn't working for money anymore, but I was always thinking, well, I need to have a hobby. I need to know what I'm going to do before I can go and do that next thing, but never found the time to think about and plan, start a hobby. Eventually, I decided that's hopeless. It's never going to happen. I spend too much time when I get involved in something. I work at it wholeheartedly. And so 2016, 5 years ago now, almost to the week, I said, okay, I'm done, and retired. And very quickly found that retirement can be very isolating. It used to be when I was working, although I in high school thought working in engineering was very isolating. No, I couldn't go eat lunch without half a dozen people wandering by and needing to talk about something, share a problem, whatever. And suddenly I didn't have that. And so one of the things I've been doing in retirement is I have been working consulting part-time, mostly with startup companies, all through personal connections. People say, oh, I heard you're available. Can you come help me with this? And that's been a lot of fun. It's a little different. You can make a different kind of impact in a startup than you can at a 100,000 person company. And so I've really enjoyed doing that. I've done, some volunteering, some other things, but it's been nice to be able to follow up on, oh, here's this interesting problem. Would you go like to look at it? And a few I've looked at and said, yeah, that's not so interesting. But now I get to make my choices without the influence of someone who's writing a review at the end of the day and telling me what I should be doing. And that's been nice.
Great. So again, I would like to encourage everyone to type your questions, or if you have a question now, just raise your hand, let me know. Dale, you're the expert at this. I guess maybe we do have a question. Iris, would you like to ask this question yourself? You're more than welcome to, or I can read it.
Oh yeah, sure. So I guess my question is that like sometimes I feel like when we're considering like a career transition, we get a lot of thoughts like, so what are the people around me going to think about this? Or like, I must be disappointing my previous mentors who spent like so much time in teaching me like, these things for my current path. But then like, if I switch paths and like, I won't be doing like what they intended me to do or something. Then like, how did like each of you overcome challenging thoughts like this to move forward with the transitions that you made?
I can field that one, Carla, because I ran into that question head on, Iris. And when I left aerospace to do the skydiving, I lost so much sleep thinking about what will the folks at the Hertz Foundation think of me? Have I thrown away all of the money that they and I got other fellowships and had other sources of funding during my graduate studies at MIT. And part of me felt like I can never face that world again. I have to make a clean break and just get away from it. And those voices, they were all imagined, okay? I wasn't having ongoing contact and no one was explicitly vocalizing, you have disappointed us, okay? But because of the way we are, we live in this world, we are influenced by others, we feel an obligation to give back if we have received something ourselves. And of course, many of us have the value of wanting to, be of service and contribute to society. And when our values seem to be in conflict with our interests or something that just feels so compelling, that's a real psychological conflict. And it is a struggle. In the long run, we will not perform well and we will not be happy if we are living up to what we think are other people's expectations or reactions and perceptions of what we're doing or why we're doing it. That is never a happy ending. And I work with a lot of clients who are struggling with dealing with explicit direction and expectations from parents, from teachers, from other professionals, but mainly from parents, because those influences stay with us long, long, long into our adult lives, who deal with this personal demon feeling like they've disappointed or gone against others' wishes. We have to acknowledge those voices. We have to understand and try to sort out where they came from and recognize that that person is speaking to us from their interests or from their goals. And that may not coincide and be the proper foundation for supporting us in our goals and our ability to find meaning and to provide something of value to society. So I think that voice, we can't shut it down. We have to give it space, but we can't let it take over our exploration and our setting our priorities on what's going to really allow me to lead a fulfilling and satisfying life. And that's how I came to realize it. And the amazing part of it was that even though I was stepping into a field where I thought I was throwing away everything that I thought was the way to give value back to society, it turned out I literally discovered a different way to add value, to do something meaningful to touch the lives of other people. And it wasn't what I expected. And like I said, it came out of the blue based on the way people responded to what I was doing, but it makes sense now. We need to have some people presenting us with possibilities and doing things that we hadn't imagined possible. And this is healthy for the human spirit. This is healthy for keeping our imaginations alive and not thinking what we've already discovered and experienced everything there is that human beings can do.
Yeah.
So sometimes the value can pop out of nowhere and be unexpected. And that may happen if you are doing something that you truly are sincerely interested in doing, and you do it well, and you share what you're doing with the outside world, even before you understand what the value might be.
I have a perspective from the other side, in that in my career, I have often been asked by people to mentor, provide advice, do whatever, and many of them have gone on to do other things. And well, I'm sure my employer thought that the purpose of my advice and my mentoring was to make them better engineers and more effective employees. I've always thought of it as a much broader role, and I'm trying to make them happy and productive people and citizens. And if they choose a path that leads them somewhere else, nothing wrong with that. And there may be things from my advice that will help them in doing that. Maybe I just help them find what makes them happier. But I've never been disappointed when I've had, engineers come to me and say, I've decided I'm going to go into academia, or I'm done with engineering, I'm going into patent law. And, I've had people do all these things. I still talk to these people today. I'm happy that they found something that they find rewarding. I don't feel like they've disappointed me at all. I understand where that feeling might come from in someone, but I'm glad they found what works for them.
We have a question for you, Lily, from Chris Owen. Would you like to ask Lily yourself, Chris?
Sure. Lily, you mentioned that Tom Weaver was really influential to you. I think it's awesome that you talked to him a lot in that capacity. I was really shy when he was my senior interviewer, and I was really shy when I was a fellow, and was very formal with him, and that was really cool to hear that you had that experience. So my question is, what role did, and this is actually for everyone, what roles did mentors have in the transition decision making for you guys? Like, was it transitory, or like a long-term thing? Like, was there kind of a training wheels period and that kind of like helped you through the period and continued on? And what were, the tensions and challenges that they helped facilitate you through?
Yes. So in that particular example, when I was in grad school and I was trying to navigate that process of changing research groups, I spoke with many people. I spoke with many professors, especially some of whom I didn't know that well, but I was just trying to get all these different ideas, like Dale was saying. And some of them were closer friends and mentors that I kept, that I did follow up with through a longer term period, through the transition and out the other side. Some were people I only spoke with once. I remember I talked with Rahul Sarpeshkar at MIT, and I hardly knew him. I was just kind of exploring, and he said, "Do what makes your heart beat faster." And but I still remember that. And also, one thing that I find helpful is sometimes when you talk to people, some people distinguish between advice versus counsel. And I think that can sometimes be helpful in framing, where is this person coming from? I think of advice as sometimes being really like more of a specific, oh, you should do X, Y, Z. And counsel is maybe a little bit more going deeper into understanding where you're coming from, or asking you questions to help you develop the answer yourself. So for me, and I've seen this pattern repeated throughout transition life at later stages as well, I'll often go and try to talk to a number of different people who are doing all different things, but there often are a few people that I have a closer relationship with, that I maintain more contact with. But I was also kind of scared of talking with Tom Weaver and formal when I was a student too. I was constantly terrified that I would lose my fellowship. So,
Same here. That might be more than one of us fellows for sure. That's really cool. The sort of difference between the counseling, like which is more, I guess, coming from oneself versus the prescriptive, which advice kind of falls into as a category.
We have a question from Amy. Amy, would you like to ask that yourself? Whoop, we can't hear you.
Hi.
Thanks.
My question is for all the panelists, but it was prompted by something Greg said about working in teams. And my question has to do with, what were some of the communications challenges you found when you left graduate school and started working and had to work in teams?
Well, one of the challenges I found fairly quickly was cross-cultural communications. I'm working at various companies, but there's engineers coming from everywhere. My experience is Americans are a plurality, maybe even, the largest single nationality, but far from a majority. And trying to get people to work together sometimes is challenging. I notice engineers coming from Southeast Asia, very reserved, don't ever object to management, follow what you're told to do. And then engineers from the Middle East, which they seem to feel like they have to beat you up just to enjoy the interaction. Nothing personal about it. That's just the way they are. And when you have both these people on the same team, trying to get information to flow from one to the other was not something that undergrad or graduate school had prepared me for at all. But it was critical to success of the group. It's like the one person's silent, the other person is just constantly going. It wasn't a challenge I did not anticipate at all. But it's one I've come to enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Dale, this is a question from Jordan Edmonds. Jordan, would you like to ask your question directly?
Sure, yeah. So Dale, I was wondering about, so you talked about expectations of other people that you perceived while you were in graduate school and after graduate school. In hindsight, how much of that was real and how much of that was your own sort of inner voices just telling you lies or amplifying other people's expectations?
I love that question. And some of it was very real, Jordan. I will admit, when I was going through some of the fellowship activities and received my award, I asked Lowell Wood, I had a meeting with him afterwards. I asked him, why did you choose me? And his answer was verbatim, because we believe you'll make a difference. And those are the words that hung with me. And even though he didn't say in what way, why would the Hertz Foundation fund education for elite programs in the applied physical sciences if there wasn't the hope, if not expectation, but the hope that the person would then take that education forward and make a difference in that way in the world. And so that was really the core phrase that made me wrestle with, specifically the feeling that I was abandoning this expectation by the Hertz Foundation. On the other hand, I was given support, and I did have messages embedded in me from my family. My father changed careers multiple times. His values supported doing what makes you happy, doing what you feel fulfilled doing. And you can't put aside, what you are trained to believe and think from parents. And so thank goodness He didn't say, you've got to fulfill these expectations, or we have hopes that you'll run a big major aerospace company someday. As I was also told I could possibly do by a top manager in aerospace, and the one who when I went to his retirement party, he said, you're going to be running this place someday. Well, that was Dan Golden, whom you may know, who went off to become one of the longest tenured administrators of NASA and made his mark. But he knew me. People, top management at TRW knew me. So there was, and I was given awards. I received the Woman of Achievement Award and other awards for my performance, my professional performance at TRW. So there's also that buildup of semi-explicit expectation that I was going to progress professionally within that organization. So the answer is a lot of it was explicit, but of course the way it weighed on me and the way I let it influence me was totally my own doing.
Thank you, Dale.
We received when people registered some questions, and I'm just going to mention what some of those are, and maybe the panel can just address them in their own way, unless the people who ask the questions are on the call and would like to ask the question. If so, you can speak up or add it to the chat. For example, there specifically was a question from someone who registered about the transition between academia to industry, and that's something, Lily, you've probably of all the panelists have done the most directly. So you might want to touch on that. It was a
couple of times.
So yeah, anyone who wants to add, shed light on that. That's one question. There was a question about monetary constraints in transitions, and something about grad student transitions. I don't know if that means from grad school to another grad school or what exactly, but those are some of the types of questions we've received. Anyone want to answer?
I'll just speak to the transition, leaving MIT and then going into aerospace. Okay, so that's more of a natural transition, but you'd think that kind of transition, everybody has been, a lot of people have been through it. You can talk to people and know what it's about, but there were still components of it that took me by surprise. MIT is a very rich, diverse community of people who are very creative and driven to acquire knowledge and to build knowledge and to answer new challenging questions and to answer questions that may have never been answered before, and to undertake endeavors where they don't even know if they're going to get to a point where they have an answer. I mean, MIT has a requirement that your PhD thesis be advancing the state of the art and answering a new question. And we know how many PhD students flounder and actually can't be certain that they're going to do something new, but it's the pursuit of an answer that is so important. That is completely opposite when you get into industry. You have to find an answer. You have to have a solution. And not only that, you have constraints of time and budget and resources. So it's all of a sudden, oh my God, this whole sense of freedom and whole sense of opportunity to explore and possibly chase down a rabbit hole that ends up not panning out, that goes away. And you have to answer to the needs of the program. Okay, so that was something I needed to adjust to. It ended up being great because then there's a feeling of teamwork when you're on a project and you're all lockstep, moving together, focused on the same goal, and you achieve certain milestones with, huge sense of personal accomplishment. The feeling of it being a team effort is significant and is different from having just completed a thesis or 2 or 3 at school. Okay, so that's a big difference. I'll let the others speak to their experiences of that transition.
That was very well said. I think echo a lot of the same ideas. When I transitioned from being in grad school in engineering to being working in a consulting firm in a business role, you know, there's just so much. I didn't have a lot of, I didn't have formal training in business, so there was a lot of learning on the job. And I think any kind of transition, you're kind of learning about this whole new world, the vocabulary, the people, the ideas. And so that part of it actually was really fun, because I mean, there's a lot of parts of transitions that are really stressful, and it can be stressful too about, did I make the right decision? I think a lot of the stress also comes when you're thinking about academia to industry, or these things that, you know, is this a reversible decision, or is this not reversible? Could I go back? Or, you know, and sometimes you can go back and sometimes it's harder. Like if you go to industry and you don't like it, like I think after, like, you know, if it's only been like a year or something, it wouldn't be that uh, I've known people who successfully went back to academia. So there's a kind of fear of doing, but then there's also the fun of actually just being immersed in this totally different world with totally different people who think differently. And so I enjoyed that part of it, that learning part.
Yeah, I think the first step in a transition, if you're doing something, you're successful at it, you're good at it, the first step in a transition is always a step backwards. And now it's time to learn. It's time to figure out what matters to do better. And if you go into it prepared that, you know, I'm consciously going to take a step backwards, I'm going to recognize that up front, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to learn and do the best that I can do, you'll do much better. If you go into transition thinking that you're going to, on the first day, perform at the same level you've been performing, something you've been doing for quite a while, then it's probably more of a rude surprise. And that probably emphasizes the stress and reduces the fun of learning. And to me, if you recognize up front that you do have to take a step backwards and just enjoy the experience, it turns out better.
Can I speak to one thing that that Lily brought up, and I think Greg touched on also, is the concept of regret. Regret is believing that the path you did not take was going to be more fruitful or more successful than the path you take. And that is a fantasy. You did not take the other path, so you cannot realistically judge what would have happened. People feel regret if the current path they're on isn't fulfilling every one of their expectations, but it's not. Regret means you believe that, oh, the other path would have fulfilled all these expectations. And we can't do that. We don't have a reverse time machine and then rerun it. You know, I don't know if I can't travel to parallel universes. So, you know, that's out of the question. But I mean, the only time you can objectively assess would the other outcome have been different than the current one is if you have quantitative objective data like the stock market. Okay, buying at a different time might have had a different outcome on your wealth right now, but we don't have that when we make these major life decisions and career choices. So I've come to the realization that regret is all based on fantasy, and once you do a reality check and you dismantle that fantasy, whew, it feels a lot better. The regret goes away. You're smiling, Lily.
Yes, it's a different. I guess I hadn't. That's a really interesting framework. I like that. I agree. I just even the tough times that I've been through, or times that I really struggled. I don't necessarily feel a sense of regret about it. I just feel like that's what happened, and it's part of my story. And it's part of who I am now, and it's more. I guess I just think more about what is the situation now and what do I do going forward?
Well, we are at the end of our time. I will just add that Chris Owen typed in a book he recommends, Richard Hamming's Talk You and Your Science, which covers transitions and taking steps back versus moving forward rapidly. Something else maybe to take a look at. So I will finish by just reminding everyone, well, thanking our panelists, first of all. Thank you very, very much for all your stories, advice. I'm sure it was very helpful to everyone. We have 2 more innovation hours scheduled. The one on Saturday, January 30th is with Caitlin Schutz on how dark forces shape our universe. And then in February, Bill Weil will be speaking on driving rapid decarbonization, and that is on February 17th. So you can get more information on our website, but we do hope to see all of you there, and Happy New Year. Thanks for joining today.
Thanks, everyone. It's been fun.
Yes, thanks everyone. And if you haven't checked out Dale's freestyle skydiving, it's incredible. So treat yourself and check out one of her videos. They are truly inspiring.
Mm-hmm. They are.
I'll do that.
Dale, Megan, Billy.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.